Thanks, Evan, and thanks for having me here today. Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Davies. I'm head of behavioural finance for Oxford Risk, and I'm going to be talking to you today really about the work that we've been doing for the last two to 2.5 years, which is about taking behavioural science and behavioural finance and really at last making it scale in terms of adoption and delivery. So I'm going to be talking about personalised behavioural engagement. Before I go there, very briefly, Oxford Risk, for those who don't know us, we are a spin-out of Oxford University. We're a fintech. We build software to help people make better financial decisions. And we've been deeply invested in behavioral science, behavioral finance from our very outset. But we also have expertise in more traditional quant finance, risk measurement, portfolio theory, etc. Data science, which is going to be vitally important for any form of personalization. And then digital and increasingly AI for the delivery, for the scalability. So where do we start? Well, personalization has been on the cards for a long time. People have been talking about personalization for a very long time. But often that's really been about segmentation, often on fairly traditional reasons. We segment our clients according to standard demographics, according to wealth level, according to life stage. And it's personalization of a sort, but it's really not personal enough. Because of what it misses, what it really ignores, is that a huge amount of what you need to think through in order to communicate to people personally is not their demographics, it's not their life stage, it's not their balance sheet. It is their financial personality, their need for emotional comfort, and the barriers, emotional and behavioral, that they have in doing the right thing. So if we think about this, there are really three things that people need to make good decisions. Firstly, they need a sense of urgency. I might know exactly what I need to do, but if I don't feel that it's today's problem, I'm going to leave it till next year, and then the following year, and the following year, and 20 years of next years down the line, I'm in real trouble. So people need to feel that this is an issue that has to be addressed now. The second thing people need is knowledge. They don't need to know enough to get everything absolutely right. But what they need is enough knowledge not to get things badly wrong, and enough knowledge to feel comfortable getting going. And the last one, and this is the one, urgency and knowledge are often tackled quite directly. There's a lot of talk about financial education and building client capabilities, and urgency, closing that intention action gap. But the real thing that people need in order to enact a decision is enough emotional comfort with the decision that they can actually put it into practice and they can get going. They must have the emotional capacity to follow through. Now, if we add these things together, I suppose this is the question, though, why do we care about behavioral science in this context? And many of you may have seen something like this before, this cycle of market emotions. The fundamental reason it's important is because not concentrating on emotional comfort, not concentrating on our behavioral mistakes and our emotional blockers when investing is phenomenally costly to people. The average investor forgoes around 3% per annum on their total investable assets because of our very human need to do what feels comfortable, emotionally comfortable in the moment. So what we're all effectively doing is we are sacrificing long-term returns in order to purchase for us short-term emotional comfort. And we do this in a whole raft of different ways. When people are invested, we do what feels comfortable along the journey. We often buy when it's more comfortable, when markets are higher. We sell when markets are lower. You obviously don't need me here to sit here and tell you that to be a good investor, you need to buy low and sell high. But our brains, our psychology hardwires us to tend to do exactly the opposite. But we make other mistakes. We overtrade. We act too often on too little information. We make decisions where we should sit tight and just do nothing. We under-diversify. We chase stories. We chase narratives. We invest in the familiar, not the good. And all of these are effectively decisions that we make that can be thought of us being in quest of what feels emotionally comfortable at the moment. So those are all decisions. Those are all bad things that people do through that cycle as markets go up and down. But for most investors, actually, the most reliable behavioral cost is not what they do when they invest. It's the fact that most people don't invest early enough, they don't invest enough, and they sit with money in cash in their savings accounts year after year after year doing nothing. That reluctance to get invested is a phenomenally expensive way to get to sleep at night, and it is almost an exclusively behavioral and emotional problem. Because for all of us, in the short term, and that's where our emotions function, only in the short term, it is emotionally uncomfortable taking your money from somewhere that feels safe, the savings account, and putting it into the markets, the investments. So we see all around the world that investors sit on too much cash for too long, and it costs them huge amounts of money. So that 3% comes up from, it's a composite of the costs that we impose on ourselves when we are invested because we want to do what feels comfortable, and the costs that we impose on ourselves because we're too reluctant to get invested in the first place. And if we can help narrow that gap, constantly narrowing the gap between the decision that it is right for us to pursue and the other decision that it is emotionally comfortable for us to pursue right now, if we can narrow that gap, there is a lot of money on the table for us to recapture for investors. And it is a rare win-win-win, because if we can get people to recapture some of that 3%, it is good for investors. They get invested and they stay invested and they get better returns and better outcomes. It's good for wealth managers, for advisors, and for asset managers, because they increase their assets under management and they get more stable clients. And it is good for the country. It is good because more money is going to productive use in the economy. And therefore, it is good for the economy as a whole and good for the population as a whole. So what can we do about that? Well, the first thing is knowledge is important. One of the things that we have pulled together in the last 12, 18 months is an online course on the art of behavioral investing. And it's really targeted at everyday investors, built on the insights that we and myself from doing this for the last 20 years, all the stuff that I've spent 20 years advising advisors to tell their clients on how to overcome their biases, how to invest better, how to partition your emotions. All of the psychological tools and techniques are all packaged into this course. So it's about delivering knowledge in an accessible way. But solving the knowledge gap is only actually one small part of the problem. What we really want to do is to be able to deliver to people behavioral insights and personalization at scale, so that we can deliver messages and communication and engagement at the point people are making decisions, in order to make it that much more likely that they're going to do the right thing, rather than just cleave to the emotionally comfortable but very, very expensive thing. And so our solutions fall into three camps here. We start with something that I have spoken about many times before, including in this very conference a couple of years ago, which is understanding financial personality. If we want to personalize, we need to know how one person is different from another, and we need to know what those differences mean in terms of the unique behavioral and emotional barriers that get in the way to doing the right thing. So that understanding of financial personality, these are tools that we've been working on for 15 plus years now. Psychometric tools, very simple questionnaires that can be delivered to people. Our core 7 scales that we measure here take no more than 2 minutes of client engagement time to answer those questions, to get a really, really rich financial personality assessment. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that in due course. The second aspect is, once we know that, how do we use that to effectively segment people, and not segment people on these traditional bases of life stage and demographics, but segment people into behavioral personas? What really matters? What is really different about this person that matters for how we should communicate with them? What messages and nudges are likely to resonate with them more? What product features and characteristics are going to make them more comfortable, so that they can stick with the program when times get turbulent and times get tough? And the third piece is the behavioral engagement libraries. So we've spent many years now effectively building up libraries of messages, narratives, nudges, if you like, things that we know that for a specific use case, and that use case might be cash deployment? How do I encourage people to take their money from the savings account and put it to work? Or a second use case for which we would have a separate library is if markets are turbulent, what are the messages and narratives and nudges I put in front of people in order to persuade them to calm down and to stick out the turbulence? So these engagement libraries are lists of behavioral interventions that we can then match to individual personality signatures. So any individual will have certain things, certain nudges or messages or interventions that will resonate more with them and some that will resonate less. So let's move on to those three things in turn. I will start with the financial personality. This is stuff, as I say, we've been doing for decades now. We have really got this down to a fine art because over 15 years, we've been collecting data from tens of thousands of carefully collected research individuals, investors across 4 continents. We've got personality data on hundreds of thousands of existing clients. So we work this both on carefully collected and selected research samples, as well as looking at actual clients through our client organizations. And what we've done is isolate the dimensions of financial personality that are most important if we want to describe what is different between one person and another with regard to how they make financial decisions. And the way we've done that is really statistical. We use very tried and tested, academically robust statistical techniques to identify these dimensions, to make sure that they're calibrated on baseline populations so that we know what the scores mean in terms of whether someone is low or medium or high. And we've collected information now. We've built scores here that are available on more than 15 different dimensions of financial personality. We actually have something around 18, but I'll show you here on screen 15 of those dimensions. And you can see they cover a pretty wide range. At the top left, you've got risk tolerance. It's really the only aspect of personality that classical finance theory has any space for at all. What is your willingness to trade off risk and return in the long term? And therefore, which portfolio do you pick from the efficient frontier, if you want to get sort of geeky about this in terms of portfolio theory? But classical finance theory, and pretty much most of the finance industry, really assumes that beyond that, people are all the same. All I need to do is describe their risk tolerance, and other aspects of personality come very secondary to life stage and wealth level and all of those other traditional segmentation techniques. But you can see here we have a whole raft of other ones. The ones at the bottom, by the way, are the ones in green, are all about sustainability and people's preferences for including impact and values in their investing. We have the 3 at the top. These all play a specific role in identifying the suitable risk level in the tools that we provide to advisors in order to help them to do that. That's our investor compass tools. That's risk tolerance, confidence levels, and people's composure levels. Composure is a vital scale. It's really indicative of someone's tendency towards short-term anxiety, your emotional engagement with the present, and whether you are high or low composure makes a fundamental difference to how to the solutions that you should have and how you should be communicated to. But in the middle there, you can see we've got a whole lot of others. We've got impulsivity, we've got familiarity preference, liquidity preference, etc. We tend not to ever measure all of these. So we have statistically identified 7 of these scales that we know are the most powerful in terms of bang for buck, signal for noise. If you know someone's scores on these 7 scales, you have the greatest statistical ability to understand how they are different from another person. And every one of these 7 scales tells me something specific and something different about what I should do for that person with regard to product selection, to communication, to engagement, towards being concerned with their behavioral vulnerability. If you're worried about compliance with in the UK with consumer duty or any regulatory environment that requires you to look after clients' vulnerability. But beyond these 7 scales, so we collect data now on tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals through clients of ours all around the world on these 7 scales. And sometimes we collect data on more of the scales that have particular uses. But the second layer to this is going beyond a financial personality signature. If you go through our financial personality assessment, as I say, those 7 scales take about 2 minutes to answer them. And you instantly get played back your scores versus the population on all of those scales. But what we also can do now, because we've been doing a lot of statistical processing on data, is we can identify your persona, a behavioral persona. We can think of this as a behavioral segmentation. And we don't use any of the standard demographics or wealth staging here. This is based purely on personality. And we know statistically that there are common combinations of scores on these personality traits that pop up again and again in the environment, out in the wild, as it were. So we have the ability instantly now, when someone goes through this test, to tell them not just what their scores are on these scales, but to attribute them into one of 10 proprietary behavioral personas that statistically, if you like, mop up the greatest number of people in the smallest number of groups. And so here you see on screen, this is the planner. This planner will have a particular signature across all of those 16 scales. But you see 3 of them on screen here. So planners tend to be quite low financial comfort, which means they tend to be a bit anxious about their financial future and their financial situation. They worry about their financial well-being. They tend to be low confidence, so they're reluctant to make financial decisions. And they're high desire for guidance, which means they are much more comfortable if they are getting guidance from somewhere. That could be an advisor, it could be friends, it could be families, it could be influencers. The advice that they rely on isn't always good advice. It depends on the source. But these are people who psychologically tend to look for assistance and guidance. And we can identify who's a planner and who's one of each of these other things. But the little chart that you can see down in the bottom right there is you can also get an MIS dashboard over your entire client base to see how they break down across these personas, what their scores are, how the mean scores of your client base compare to the mean scores of the population at large, etc. And I'm going to show you our 10 personas now in a particular way. So you see 10 bubbles there on screen. Each of those is one of our personas. And you can see they're spread out in 2 dimensions. As I say, each of them actually is built on 16 different dimensions of financial personality, but I've had to squish it all into 2. And the primary dimension there is from left to right, avoid to approach. People on the left are those who are more emotionally comfortable if they avoid investing. They tend to be lower confidence. They tend to be lower risk tolerance, to some degree, lower composure. And on the right, you get the people who are more confident, higher financial comfort, higher risk tolerance, etc. And there's 5 on each side. The next thing we can do is say, well, okay, what about high and low? That is largely about desire for guidance. The people at the top are the ones who are more comfortable if they feel that they have shared the emotional burden of decision-making with someone else. And the ones at the bottom are more emotionally comfortable if they feel that they have controlled all the decision-making themselves. And so you can already see, depending on which quadrant someone is in here, you would be talking to very, very different people, even if their financial circumstances were absolutely identical and their demographics were identical. But we can show more overlays on this as well. It tends to be that people who are approachers and self-directed, they also tend to be the ones who are more composed, and the ones who are more anxious tend to be up in the top left. And we know statistically, it's not obvious that this should be true in any way, but the people who are more values-focused or impact-focused or sustainability-focused tend to be the ones on the top right, and the people who are not impact-driven at all are the self-directed avoiders down at the bottom. So you can see where your bubble sits here, there's a very rich overlay of understanding who's in here. And we've given all of them names. You can see a few of them on screen. Well, you can see all of them on screen. I will be referencing a few of them as we go through. Top left there, the planners tend to be a very large group in most financial advice client bases. Guardians, down towards the bottom. Actually, if you look at advisors themselves, advisors tend to have a preponderance of guardians. Pioneers are interesting. They look like they're really close to the legacy builders, but actually on certain dimensions, they're fundamentally different. The pioneers, for example, are massively impulsive people, whereas the legacy builders, pretty much the same on many other dimensions, but are not impulsive at all. So we get this very, very rich set of being able to understand your client base spread through these personas that we know are highly representative of real investor characteristics out in the wild. And we also know that some of them are quite close. So if you didn't want to talk to 10 groups, you can fold them up a level. So the independent strategist and balanced strategist, you can fold into one group and talk to those as one. And now you're talking to 9 groups rather than 10. You can fold the protectors together. You can fold the builders together. So all of this is hierarchical. And if you wanted to differentiate your communication at the level of just 4 groups, and you want to know what are the 4 groups that most fully cover the population out there, our data will tell you, our tools will tell you. If you wanted to do it at the level of 6 groups, if you wanted to go for all 10, all of these things can be done at a touch of a button once you've managed to get your client base to engage just 2 minutes with this population survey. So we talk a little bit about personas. I've spoken about the planner a bit already. You can see the planner on the left. Every one of these personas we know about in some detail. We know their behavioral barriers. We know their tendencies. We know what we should do for them. So, for example, the planners, they're cautious, they're structured, they're methodical. If you remember, they were the ones up on the top left. So tend to be guided, tend to want to be guided, and tend to be slightly avoided. These are cautious individuals. They prefer familiar, low-risk options. They seek guidance and evidence to feel secure in their financial decisions. They like to feel in control. They prefer stability, clarity, but can get stuck in indecision. So we've got these pen portraits of who's in there. We also, by the way, know a great deal about the demographic characteristics of each of these groups. We know which ones tend to be more male or female, which ones tend to be younger and older. But the important thing here is the personas themselves are never driven by the demographics. They're driven by preferences. They're driven by what makes people comfortable or uncomfortable. And that makes them so much more powerful than any segmentation that's built on those demographics. But you might be left at this point with a bit of a so what? Okay, so you've identified this person. You know what their financial personality is. You've put them in a persona. So what? This is where the rubber really hits the road, because with the libraries that we've been building, we can map people to very specific and practical guidance on what they should do differently from someone who's in another persona. So for this planner, you'd want to do things like start with a cash buffer. You absolutely want to give them the safety net, not just because it's valuable for financial reasons. The safety net is also an emotional safety net. It overcomes that risk-related anxiety that enables you to get going in the first place. For the planners, you want to give them very simple step-by-step guidance with very minimal jargon. Now, we should probably, as an industry, minimize jargon for all personas, but some of them are much more sensitive to it than others, and the planners will be in that one. Offer them pre-commitment options. These planners are very uncomfortable making decisions in the moment. They have low confidence there. They're not particularly impulsive people either. So instead of asking them to do something today, ask them to sit down and make a plan for what they're going to do in the future. There's a huge behavioral literature around pre-commitment. And for people who struggle to act, helping them to decide to do something in the future. I mean, let's be honest, none of us ever start a diet today. We only ever start our diet on Monday. We only ever start the gym program in the new year, right? And there's a reason for that. It's a behavioral hook that makes it easier for us to get going. It removes the pressure from the initial decision. So for these planners, you want to build confidence through presenting simple steps and giving them comfort. Now, every one of our 10 personas has a rich description like this. We know who they are, we know how they're different, and we know what you should do for them. And that brings me on to the engagement libraries. So It's a library, yes, but it's also an algorithm. So for any personality signature, you went through this and you filled in your 7-core scales, or you went further and you got your full scores on all 16 scales. Yes, you'd have a persona played back to you, but our algorithms are then able to go, okay, if the thing we're trying to achieve here is to make you comfortable to put your cash to work, of the library of nearly 50 different behavioral techniques and interventions we have there, which ones are going to work with you? Because they won't be the same ones as work for someone else. Or if markets have been turbulent and are highly volatile right now, of the selection of 40 or so messages in our behavioral library, what do we do to put you into that? What do we do? What do we do to calm you down? Which messages will work for you rather than someone else? So we can use this for behavioral interventions. We can use it for product matching. So which types of products are going to be more comfortable for you? We can use it for tailored messaging, and we can use it for timing. What's the best timing for communications, and what's the best tone for communications? Now, we bring this all together, and you've got, on the one hand, you've got this financial personality fingerprint. And by the way, to collect that at a commercial level requires no deep integration, and it requires no exchange of data from your traditional client customer database, right? So all of this is, we're providing you with an additional behavioral layer over everything you've already got. What we would love to do, of course, is to also then combine that with existing client data. And we are doing these deep dives with a number of our proof of concept clients around the world, where we're doing deeper integration and we're blending our behavioral data with their existing client data, because then you get real power of identifying stable personality traits, but also being able to identify, currently, has their behavior changed? Are they logging in more frequently than they were? What are their transaction patterns? And these things together can be incredibly powerful. And then we mix both of those with our engagement libraries, our content libraries, product data, education and content, nudges and interventions. And all of that, the algorithms are bringing together to provide hyper-personalized real-time interventions that go, what do I say to this client at this time in the right tone and at the right moment and in the right way? And if we can do that, we can close that gap, that gap between the decision that actually is good for my financial future and the decision that feels emotionally comfortable right now, because we're not relying on background education and competence. Even highly knowledgeable, experienced investors have all of that go completely out the window when they're stressed and when they're anxious. What we're relying on is delivering the right message at the right time in the right tone to each and every client. Now, let me give you just one more practical example from that. I speak about this in the abstract, but let's take a specific example of cash deployment. It's the one that around the world our clients are most focused on, tend to be more focused on this than keeping people calm in volatile markets. Partly, I think, because, well, markets aren't always volatile. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But people are always sitting on too much cash. So it's a fairly evergreen behavioral problem to solve. And it's one that you don't have to wait for the right moment. You can just get going and get testing. So let me take 3 of our personas. We've got the planner, the guardian, and the pioneer. The planner I've spoken to already quite a bit there. Low confidence, low composure. The guardian, actually quite a lot of advisors tend to be guardians, as I said. High composure individuals, pretty high confidence, not particularly impulsive. So, cool, calm, and collected. And the pioneers are these highly impulsive people who tend to have quite high confidence and quite high impulsivity. They certainly think they know what they're doing, and they tend to act on it quite a lot. So if all of these people, imagine they have exactly the same financial circumstances. They're all sitting on surplus cash, doing nothing year after year after year, and we want to get them going. What do we do for them? Well, I'm going to start with the guardian, because the thing that our industry typically does is says, well, I've identified your problem. Your problem is you're not invested. I'm going to tell you a lot of numbers-based information about how the risk-return trade-off of long-term investing is in your own best interests. And then I'm basically just going to tell you to get going. Now, for The Guardian, actually, that might work. They're reasonably composed people. They have medium-high confidence. They're not particularly impulsive, but it's if they're convinced of it, they might get going. They're about the only group for whom that traditional message is going to work. If I tried that on a planner, it's not going to work in the slightest. So what would I do for a planner? Well, here we have to focus entirely on emotional comfort. We have to make sure that we're framing the investments to feel emotionally manageable, not just financially optimal. Using these techniques like pre-commitment. Don't try to get them to make a decision today. Try to get them to make a plan for the decisions they're going to carry out in the future. So you've got, for the same financial circumstances, a completely different set of communications and actions to get them working. And the pioneer, you will try things that you would never try for the other two. You might actually want to use their FOMO, the fact that they tend to get really stressed when other people are earning investment returns when they aren't. You might use market timing and go, buy the dips. It is a very, very dangerous message to use for many personas. But for the pioneers, actually, it might be the very thing that gets them moving. So for these guys, you want to motivate action. You want to highlight the future cost of missing out. You want to tell them about how much they have already missed out if they had been invested for the last 5 or 6 years. So the point here is, it is very practical. Once you get people's measured on a behavioral financial personality basis, we can segment on that basis, and we can give them individualized messages and interventions to get them to do a whole raft of things that are in their own best interests and are in advisors and wealth managers' best interests too, because ultimately it's all about helping people get invested and helping people stay invested. Now, one side bit on this is messaging is one thing, helping to deliver personalized communication and engagement and messaging. But we can also actually help to navigate people towards solutions that are more appropriate for them. So we've been doing a lot of work in the last couple of years, particularly around retirement and decumulation, and what sorts of packages of products people should have in their portfolio at retirement that are going to make them likely to have a more comfortable retirement and make better decisions. So let's just take someone here. Here's someone who, these are two scales I've not spent a lot of time on so far. Someone who's low desire for legacy. They don't have a big bequest motive. They're not someone who needs to leave a lot to the next generation or to the world after they're gone. They do, however, have a massive spending reluctance. And we see this of a lot of people in retirement. They end up living in a sort of self-imposed poverty because they are so reluctant to spend their money, because they are terrified of running out of money before they die. They're worried about sequencing risk. They're worried about longevity risk. Not that they would put it in those terms. What they're basically worried about is running out of money. These people, relative to others who may have exactly the same financial circumstances, for them, purchasing guaranteed income is a much, much better deal. And again, because of nothing about their balance sheet or their cash flow or their retirement date or anything else, just because their personality measures mean that security that comes from a guaranteed income stream is more important to them than the bequest that you'd be able to retain if you didn't buy that annuitized guaranteed income. But it won't be appropriate for everyone, right? So let's look at someone different. Someone who has low financial comfort. They are anxious about their financial future, and they have a high desire for legacy. So maybe they want to leave money to their kids, or they really want to leave money to philanthropic activities after they pass away, etc. So guaranteed income is not a good solution for them. What these people need are investment solutions that produce income, not guaranteed income. You're not buying an annuity that, with your pot that doesn't leave anything left when you die. But you do want to focus on investment portfolios that generate natural income or are providing an income flow, a distribution income flow off the portfolio. Many people, by the way, are made deeply emotionally uncomfortable by spending capital rather than income. Now, financially, it's a bit arbitrary, right? Because you can follow a total returns approach and you can always sell down the capital to generate the income. But there are people out there for whom that is behaviorally and emotionally something they feel uncomfortable with. And so you should seek a different set of solutions. And then lastly, let's take someone who's very low composure. They really struggle to get invested and they struggle to stay invested in volatile markets or turbulent markets. And that's compounded by the fact that they're highly impulsive. What these people need is they need smoothing. They need funds that actively seek to minimize volatility, that provide a smoother ride. So you can see here, just by looking at a small number of financial personality measures, even if these people have exactly the same financial circumstances, the mix of products that's right for them is different. And I'm going to end just on a little bit of practicality here. There's a lot here that goes in. We're talking about personality profiling. We're talking about behavioral segmentation. We're talking about matching people to messages, etc. The real point is here that technology these days enables us to do this in a way that doesn't require huge long-term integration projects. Everything we do is built on APIs, and it doesn't require a huge amount of data sharing to get going. I mean, data sharing is great, but you could actually turn on the delivery of individual client insights to your clients just by giving them all a link that enables them to complete the financial personality assessment and a unique, completely anonymized identifier that we can use to provide insights to that. So you get insights at 2 levels, or 3 levels, actually. The clients can get insights themselves. Your advisors can get individual insights on their clients. So you're equipping the advisors with a guidance tool of what to talk to each client about and in what tone and and with what timing. But also, you get to integrate this into your client MIS. So you get behavioral insights at an aggregate level of your client population. How does my client base spread across these personas? How does my client base differ across different behavioral financial personality traits? How does this differ across different advisors or different teams? The second thing you can do is you can integrate this into your CRM systems, because now you have behavioral segmentation that allows for better targeting, more personalized campaigns, individualized communication and messaging. And that last bit is really about integrating it into your user journeys. So at an individual level, how do I change my product recommendations based on what I know about this person's behavioral profile? How do I change the campaign recommendations if I'm trying to get people to deploy their cash, etc.? So everything now, the culmination of behavioral finance with data science, which allows for the personalization, with technology and AI and digital technologies to allow this to integrate seamlessly through APIs into your system, means that we're at a point now that in the 25 years where I've been doing applied behavioral finance, I think we've always been struggling to reach, which is the behavioral ideas are great, right? But there's always a massive so what at the end of it, which is how do I get them adopted and how do I get them to scale? And those two questions have very little to do with the value of the behavioral ideas themselves. They have everything to do with how you integrate that with data science and with technology. So I'm going to end on one last thing, because no talk these days is complete without some mention of AI and LLMs. But the world we're in, this scaling of behavioral finance is so in tune with the sort of capabilities that we're finding ourselves able to use now. Machine learning analytics, the stuff that we're doing there to identify personas and clusters and identify the scales themselves, these are built deeply on machine learning algorithms, factor analyses, cluster analyses, and our ability to now do this in real time at massive scale means we can take behavioral insights and just deliver them much faster and at a much more granular level. The second one is, we're not in a world anymore where we can run A/B tests and randomized control trials for everything we want to do. They're great if you want academic level evidence, but they are really slow. You need sample sizes that are vast. They're very difficult to do, very costly. And what we want to do is we want to pump personalized information out into the world and measure what happens at an individual level. The problem then is you get very, very complex data sets back. Well, at least it used to be a problem, because this is exactly the sort of thing, exactly the sort of data set that modern AI and LLMs and machine learning are incredibly well equipped to deal with. So what we do is we don't have to set up, one randomized control trial a month. What we do is we just start messaging people and we measure what happens. What are they clicking on? How is their behavior changing? What has happened to their transaction patterns? Have they put cash to work? And then we use these sophisticated machine learning algorithms to say what has worked and what hasn't. And we tweak the parameters of the model to boost the stuff that's working and suppress the stuff that's not working. And so the models are learning in real time and getting better and better and better in the context of your client base and your proposition. And the last one, of course, is LLMs. And I think this should be obvious, but if you want to personalize content at scale, then using large language models is fundamentally powerful. We're now at the position where we can feed LLMs seed copy and go, right, markets are turbulent. You've asked your CIO for 800 words on why everyone should stay calm. And it's good, but it's a bit sort of one size fits all. I know as a marketer, I know how my client base breaks down across these Oxford Risk personas. And we have, we are in the process right now of building the personalization that says, give me your seed copy at a touch of a button. You will get this back in 10 versions for each of those personas and a list of which clients to send which to. So in real time, you are personalizing your content in a way that is behaviorally effective and behaviorally efficient. So thank you very much for your time today. Any questions, please do come and find us. We'd be delighted to demo any of the stuff for you. But the main message I'd leave you with is, I think behavioral science and behavioral finance is at an incredibly exciting point right now. And it's because we're finally being able to mix it properly with advanced data science and advanced technologies and AI and LLMs, which makes it adoptable and it makes it scalable. Thank you.